The desert wind carried more than dust that scorching afternoon in 1885. It carried the scent of forbidden desire and impending doom. Elena Hartwell stood on the porch of her newly inherited ranch, watching a young cowboy break a wild stallion with hands that moved like poetry across leather and flesh. At 42, she'd buried one husband and sworn off the complications of men. But Jake Morrison, barely 22, with eyes that held too much war and not enough innocence, made her remember what it felt to be a woman instead of just a widow. The way he looked at her across that dusty corral, raw, hungry, unashamed, sent heat spiraling through her body in ways she'd forgotten were possible. 20 years separated them, but the electricity crackling between them could have powered all of Sunset Ridge. When their eyes met, she felt something dangerous awakening in her chest, something that whispered of scandal and ruin and the kind of love that destroys everything in its path. The townspeople were already talking. The preacher was already disapproving. And somewhere in the shadows, forces were gathering that would test whether their forbidden passion could survive the brutal realities of the American West. What happens when desire collides with duty in a land where both can get you killed? Drop a heart if you've ever felt that dangerous pull towards someone you shouldn't want, and tell me where you're watching from. Elena Hartwell had come to Texas to escape ghosts, not to create new ones. The Double H Ranch stretched endlessly under a merciless sun, its vastness both intimidating and liberating. She'd inherited it from her uncle, a man she barely knew, but who'd apparently seen something in her that her Boston society couldn't. Perhaps he'd recognized a kindred spirit, someone who refused to be tamed by convention. The first time she saw Jake Morrison, he was waist-deep in the horse trough, washing off the dust from a day of breaking broncos. Water cascaded down his lean torso, each droplet catching the golden hour light like liquid amber. At 22, his body was a masterpiece of hard work and harder living. Broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist, muscles that rippled beneath sun-darkened skin. But it was his face that stopped her cold. Those pale blue eyes held depths that belonged to a much older man, carved by experiences no 22-year-old should have endured. "Ma'am," he said, straightening when he noticed her watching. His voice was whiskey rough, edged with respect, but underlaid with something that made her pulse quicken. "Didn't know anyone was there. I'm Elena Hartwell, the new owner." She extended her gloved hand, fighting the urge to stare at the way water dripped from his dark hair down the column of his throat. "And you are?" "Jake Morrison, ma'am. Your foreman, I suppose, if you'll have me." His calloused fingers engulfed her gloved ones, and even through the fabric, she felt the burn of contact. "Though I understand if you want to bring in your own people. Can you handle the work, Mr. Morrison?" She studied his face, noting the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his jaw tightened when he thought. "Yes, ma'am. I can handle whatever you need handling." The double meaning in his words sent warmth pooling low in her belly. She should have walked away then. Should have recognized the danger in the way he looked at her. Not like she was a respectable widow, but like she was a woman worth wanting. Instead, she heard herself saying, "Then the job is yours." 3 weeks later, a dust storm swept across the territory with the fury of God's own wrath. Elena had been riding fence, checking the boundaries of her new domain, when the wall of brown death rolled across the horizon. Jake found her just as visibility dropped to nothing, his strong arms pulling her from her frightened mare onto his own horse. They rode hard for shelter, his body pressed against her back, his breath hot against her ear as he shouted directions over the howling wind. When they finally reached the line shack, a crude cabin used by cowboys during long cattle drives, they stumbled inside, like refugees from hell itself. The silence after the storm's roar felt deafening. Elena stood in the center of the one-room cabin, acutely aware of Jake's presence, of the way his wet shirt clung to his chest, of how the lamplight cast shadows that emphasized every masculine plane of his face. "Storm should blow over by morning," he said, his voice carefully neutral. But his eyes traced the curve of her throat, where her shirt had come unbuttoned, lingered on the swell of her breasts, where the fabric had molded to her skin. "Mr. Morrison." She meant it as a warning, but it came out breathless. "Ma'am." He took a step closer, then another, until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Tell me to stop, and I will." She should have. Every rational thought screamed at her to maintain the boundaries that society demanded. She was Elena Hartwell, proper Boston widow, owner of the largest ranch in 3 counties. He was Jake Morrison, a cowboy young enough to be her... No, she wouldn't think that word. Instead of words, she reached up and traced that small scar above his eyebrow with one finger. He sucked in a sharp breath, his hand coming up to cover hers, pressing her palm flat against his cheek. "Elena," he whispered, and her name on his lips sounded like prayer and profanity all at once. When he kissed her, it was with the desperate hunger of a man dying of thirst who'd finally found water. His lips were firm and demanding, tasting of coffee and something indefinably masculine that made her knees weak. She responded with 20 years of suppressed passion, her arms winding around his neck, her body molding against his with shameless need. His hands found the buttons of her shirt with practiced efficiency, and she should have been shocked by his presumption. Instead, she arched into his touch as he pushed the fabric aside, his palms burning against her skin. When his mouth followed the path, his hands had blazed. Trailing fire down her throat to the lace edge of her corset, she gasped his name like a benediction. They came together on the rough wool blanket by the fire, 2 souls finding solace in each other's bodies. He worshipped her with touches that spoke of reverence and raw desire, his young strength matched by an intuitive understanding of her needs that left her breathless with wonder. When he moved above her, his blue eyes dark with passion, she saw not a boy, but a man who could match her fire with his own. Afterward, they lay tangled together while the storm raged outside, her head on his chest, his fingers trailing through her unbound hair. "This is madness," she whispered against his skin. "Maybe," he agreed, his voice rumbling in his chest, "but it's the sanest I've felt since I came back from the war." The next morning dawned clear and merciless, and with it came the weight of what they'd done. Elena rode back to the ranch house with Jake beside her, hyper-aware of every glance, every accidental touch. The hands working the corrals watched them with knowing eyes, and she felt the judgment like physical weight. By afternoon, the talk had started. By evening, it had reached the ears of Reverend Michaels, who appeared on her porch with righteous fury burning in his pale eyes. "Mrs. Hartwell," he began without preamble, "I've heard disturbing reports about your association with young Morrison." "My association with my foreman is my business, Reverend." Elena kept her voice level, though her heart was pounding. When it becomes a scandal that rocks the very foundations of Christian decency, it becomes the business of every God-fearing soul in this territory. His voice rose with evangelical fervor. "You are a woman of means and position. That boy is barely out of short pants. The impropriety is staggering." Jake appeared in the doorway behind her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Reverend," he said politely, but there was steel beneath the courtesy. "I believe Mrs. Hartwell asked you to leave her business alone." The Reverend's face purpled. And what business would that be, boy? Seducing women old enough to birth you? Preying on a grieving widow's loneliness? The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to draw blood. Elena felt Jake go rigid behind her, felt the fury radiating from him like heat from a forge. Careful, Reverend. Jake's voice was soft as silk and twice as dangerous. A man can say things he can't take back. Is that a threat, Morrison? It's a promise. The Reverend left, but his words lingered like smoke, poisoning the air between them. That night, Elena stood at her bedroom window, watching Jake work in the moonlight, and wondered if she was destroying them both. Clayton Hartwell arrived on the Tuesday train, like Judgment Day, in a three-piece suit. Elena's brother-in-law had the look of a man who'd never worked a day, but had made a fortune off the labor of others. His pale eyes assessed the ranch with the calculating gaze of someone mentally dividing assets. Elena, darling. He kissed her cheek with practiced charm. You look rustic. Clayton, I wasn't expecting you. She stepped back, instantly on guard. The family was concerned. Reports of your behavior have reached even Boston. His smile was sharp as a blade. Living alone on this godforsaken frontier, taking up with cowboys barely old enough to shave. Really, Elena, what would dear Charles have thought? The invocation of her dead husband's name was a calculated blow, and it landed. Charles is dead, Clayton. What I do now is my choice. Ah, but that's where you're wrong, my dear. He produced a sheaf of legal documents with theatrical flair. Uncle Ezra's will contains a morality clause. Should you engage in behavior deemed inappropriate by civilized standards, control of the ranch reverts to the next male heir, which, conveniently, happens to be me. Elena's blood turned to ice. You're lying. Am I? Shall we have the territorial judge examine these documents? The same judge who's already heard reports of your affair with that Morrison boy? His smile widened. 20 years difference in age. Elena. What respectable court wouldn't see that as moral turpitude? That evening, as Elena paced her parlor like a caged cat, Jake found her staring into the fire with eyes that held too much pain. He can take it all, she whispered without turning around. The ranch, everything. Unless what? She finally looked at him, her heart breaking at the confusion in his young face. Unless I send you away. Unless I prove to the world that this was just temporary madness. Jake was quiet for a long moment, his calloused hands clenched at his sides. When he spoke, his voice was steady as stone. Is that what you want, Elena? To send me away? The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Outside, the wind howled across the prairie, carrying the scent of mesquite and broken dreams. What I want, she said finally, and what I can afford are two different things. Clayton didn't just want the ranch. He wanted Elena's complete destruction. Within days, mysterious riders began harassing the cattle, cutting fence lines, poisoning water holes. The hands started quitting, intimidated by night visits from men with guns and no scruples. Blackjack Sullivan, Jake said grimly, examining hoofprints near a poisoned well. Meanest son of a bitch this side of hell. Clayton's hired himself an army. Elena loaded her rifle with steady hands. Then we'd better prepare for war. We? Jake caught her arm. Elena, this isn't your fight anymore. If you walk away now, Clayton gets what he wants, but you'll be alive to start over somewhere else. She looked at him, this beautiful, dangerous boy who'd taught her what it meant to feel again, and made her choice. I'm not walking away from you, Jake Morrison. Not from you, and not from what's mine. The attack came at dawn 3 days later. Elena was in the kitchen when the first shot shattered the window above the sink, glass spraying like icy rain. Jake's voice roared from the corral. "Get down! Get to cover!" She grabbed her rifle and crawled to the front window, her heart hammering against her ribs. In the gray pre-dawn light, she could see muzzle flashes from behind the barn, the bunkhouse, the water tower. 6, maybe 7 riders, Blackjack's crew, fanning out to encircle the ranch house. Bullets chipped the adobe walls, one ricocheting off the doorframe with a high whine. Jake burst through the back door, blood already trickling from a graze across his temple, where a stray shot had winged him during his run from the corral. "They're cutting us off," he gasped, reloading his Winchester with shaking hands. "Back door's no good. 2 of them there already. We hold the house, or we die." Elena nodded, her mouth dry as dust. She chambered around in her sharps, the metallic click steadying her nerves. "Then we hold." They took positions. Jake at the front window, Elena at the side, trading shots through the splintered frames. The air thickened with gun smoke, acrid and choking, as the crack of rifles echoed like thunderclaps. Jake's first shot dropped a rider near the barn, clean through the chest, the man crumpling without a sound. Elena's aimed high, clipping a horse's leg. The beast screamed and threw its rider, buying them a moment's chaos. But the numbers were against them. A bullet punched through the wall near Jake's head, splintering wood and forcing him to duck. He fired back blindly, cursing as his shoulder burned from the effort. "Clayton's out there, somewhere," he muttered, wiping blood from his eye. "Bastards directing this circus from cover." As if summoned, a voice cut through the din from the porch shadows. Clayton, flanked by 2 of Blackjack's men, his tailored suit dusted with grit, but his derringer steady in his manicured hand. "Morrison, Hartwell, this ends now. Throw out your guns, and I'll see you both walk away, with nothing but your hides." Jake risked a glance over the sill, his face hardening. "And if we don't?" Clayton's laugh was brittle, edged with the fear he couldn't quite hide. "Then my boys finish the job. Self-defense, they'll say. A mad widow and her gunslinger lover. Folks'll believe it." The insult landed. But Elena fired first, a warning shot that splintered the porch rail inches from Clayton's boot. One of his guards jerked, returning fire wildly, the bullet burying itself in the door behind her. Jake seized the opening, squeezing off 2 rounds. One felled the guard with a gut shot, the man howling as he hit the dirt. The second grazed Clayton's arm, spinning him back with a yelp. "Go!" Jake barked, shoving Elena toward the kitchen. "Root cellar! Now!" She hesitated, rifle still hot in her hands. "Not without you." Their eyes locked for a split second, enough for the truth to pass unspoken. This was no fairy tale. No stolen kisses in storms. It was survival, raw and unforgiving, and whatever came next, they'd face it together. Clayton's remaining men pressed the attack, bullets stitching the walls like angry hornets. Jake covered her retreat, his shots buying seconds as she kicked open the cellar hatch. He followed, slamming it shut behind them, just as lead hammered the lid. In the dim lantern light below, amid sacks of potatoes and jars of preserves, he slumped against the wall, breath ragged. The graze on his temple had opened wider, blood matting his hair, and fresh crimson seeped through his shirt from a shallow furrow across his ribs, another near miss from the porch exchange. "You're hit," Elena said, tearing a strip from her petticoat to bind the wounds. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. "Nothing fatal," he lied through gritted teeth, wincing as she pressed the cloth tight. "Clayton's spooked now. Lost 2 men. He'll call him off or come himself." She met his gaze, the air between them heavy with powder smoke and unspoken fears. "Jake, if we don't make it, we will." He cupped her face, thumb rough against her cheek, pulling her close. The kiss was brief, fierce. No poetry, just the salt of sweat and blood, and a promise forged in fire. You pulled me from the grave once. I ain't leaving you in one. Above, the gunfire stuttered, then fell silent. Footsteps creaked on the porch, slow, deliberate. Clayton's voice laced with pain and venom. Hartwell, you think this changes anything? The judge is mine. The ranch is mine. Come out, and I'll make it quick. Elena chambered another round, her resolve hardening like cooling steel. Jake struggled to his feet, rifle slung over his good shoulder. They climbed the ladder together, emerging into a ranch house, scarred but standing. Bodies lay scattered in the dust, 3 of Blackjack's men down, the others vanished into the scrub like coyotes scenting defeat. Clayton waited in the yard, arm bandaged crudely by one of his fleeing hirelings, his derringer leveled unsteadily. The final exchange was no blaze of glory. Elena fired from the doorway, her shot shattering Clayton's knee. He crumpled with a scream, the derringer skittering away. Jake finished it with a single, merciful round to the chest, the crack echoing into silence. Clayton's eyes went blank, staring at the sky as if bargaining with a god who'd long turned away. Jake swayed, the blood loss pulling at him like quicksand. Elena caught him before he fell, easing him to the porch steps. It's over, she murmured, pressing her hand to his chest where the makeshift bandage held. We held. His eyes fluttered, a ghost of a smile on bloodied lips. Told you. We would. 6 months later, Elena Hartwell stood on the platform of the railroad station in San Francisco, waiting for the evening train to Los Angeles. The California gold they'd scraped together from hidden caches had bought them new names, new histories, new possibilities. Jake, now Jack Elliott, stood beside her, his arm in a sling from the shoulder graze that had festered twice before healing crooked, but his eyes bright with the quiet humor of a man who'd stared down hell and blinked. The scandal of Sunset Ridge had followed them west, carried by telegraph wires and gossiping tongues. But California was big enough to swallow their sins, diverse enough to make their love seem less shocking among the fortune-seekers and dreamers who'd fled their own pasts. Blackjack's survivors had scattered. The ranch sold cheap to a cattle baron who asked no questions. And the territorial judge, Clayton's puppet, had buried the report under a mountain of self-defense affidavits Elena's last loyal hand had sworn to. Second thoughts? Jake asked, reading her expression, with the intuitive understanding that had grown between them like wildflowers after rain. Always, she admitted, but no regrets. We paid in blood, yours, mine, theirs, worth every drop. As their train pulled into the station, belching steam and promise into the gathering dusk, Elena thought about the price of love in a world that measured worth by convention. They'd lost a ranch, but gained each other. They'd been judged by their ages, but proven by their choices and by the scars that mapped their survival. In the end, the heart recognized no boundaries save those it chose to honor. Jake's hand found hers, calloused and warm and steady as stone. At 42 and 23, they were still an unlikely pair. But in a land built on the dreams of unlikely people, perhaps that was exactly as it should be. The conductor called "All aboard," and Elena Hartwell, soon to be Elena Elliott, stepped into her new life with the man who'd taught her that love wasn't about the years you'd lived, but about the life you chose to live. Sometimes the heart knows what the mind refuses to acknowledge. If this story moved you, hit that like button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you believe in love that defies convention, subscribe for more tales of passion, redemption, and the wild hearts that dare to love without limits.